AMD's Ryzen CPU has been launched already, and I'm sure you've seen the benchmarks of the CPU as well. So what do you think of it? Do you think Ryzen's CPU is bad for gaming? Stay tuned for more. Hey, what's up everyone? I'm Mads and you're watching the Mads Gaming News channel. You can follow me on Twitter and Facebook, so check the links in the description of this video below. And also don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell button to stay up to date with the latest news. So AMD's Ryzen CPU has been released a couple of days ago. Obviously we've seen only the most powerful versions of the CPU, so we're talking about 8-core 16 threads versions of the CPU, and no benchmarks for these CPUs we've seen so far. And you know, I would at least say that those CPUs and the benchmarks are looking at least promising. Now, depending on what tests you run, in some scenarios AMD Ryzen CPU takes a lead over Intel. In others tests, Intel takes a lead over Ryzen CPU. And remember that I'm talking about CPUs comparisons where you've got the same amount of cores and same amount of threads as well, because you know, I've seen on a couple of occasions that some people actually take 6-core 12 threads Intel CPU again and compare it against 8-core 16 threads Ryzen CPU, which doesn't really make any sense, right? I mean, okay, well, they compare it in terms of price because both actually cost like $400, right? But we're not really comparing. Benchmarks are not there to compare the price, right? Benchmarks are there to compare obviously the performance. So we want to have both CPUs to be as close to each other in terms of like specs and that kind of stuff, right? Then we can actually compare the real performance. So as I said, you know, depending on the test, you know, sometimes Ryzen takes a lead, sometimes Intel takes a lead. So I would say that Ryzen is proving itself as a very well made CPU, very well engineered CPU, especially in multi-threaded tasks. I mean, AMD was pretty good in that previously, but they actually even increased that. So if you actually working on a PC and you doing all kind of stuff at the same time, you know, Ryzen CPU is really doing a good job in managing all the tasks and that kind of stuff, right? Now there is actually one kind of like scratch on this small diamond, I would say, right? And this is actually gaming. Because I'm a gamer, I'm actually talking about games, not really games, but gaming technology and stuff. So let's focus a little bit on gaming benchmarks. Now, the problem is that Ryzen has actually not been able to compete with Intel for the last couple of years. So what developers actually been doing so far was focusing mainly on Intel CPUs as the main gaming CPUs, and they actually kind of left AMD behind because, I mean, you know, this is not really, they were kind of like, these CPUs are not really gaming CPUs, so why should we bother, right? So obviously all the optimization in games and stuff went into the Intel, right? I mean, it's similar situation, maybe not to the same extent, but still, as with graphics cards. You've got some developers optimizing their games better for NVIDIA cards, and other developers optimizing better for AMD's cards, depending on who pays more, you know, if you know what I mean, right? And we may actually end up with a similar situation on the PC CPU market, where you will have some games running better and developers optimizing better for one particular CPU, while the others will actually do that for different kind of CPU, right? And we are already seeing some movements around it, because I'm not sure if you've heard that Bethesda actually, I think they signed some kind of deal with AMD saying that they will actually optimize all their upcoming games for the Ryzen CPU. So if they are actually already talking about optimization, so that means that games, generally speaking, are not well optimized for AMD CPUs, I would say, not to mention the Ryzen, which has been on the market for like 5 years, 5 days. So now, if you look at the benchmarks, we clearly should see that there's around 20% advantage that Intel has in most of the gaming benchmarks. I mean, I've seen 2, maybe 3 games that actually is pretty similar on Ryzen and CPU, but that's pretty much it, right? Most of the games do run much better on Intel CPUs, as I said, roughly around 20% better than a Ryzen. So 20% is actually a lot and not a lot. That depends what you expect. If you are actually a hardcore PC gamer that want to play in 120 or maybe 140 frames per second, and you've got 144 megahertz monitors, you want to take full advantage of the frame rate, so every single extra frame rate may actually count for you and may be very important for you. But for most of the gamers, PC gamers, they will actually go and they will want to find a not too expensive CPU which offers a good performance. And this is where Ryzen may actually shine, because as you probably noticed already, Ryzen CPUs are much less expensive than Intel's counterparts. I mean, if you look at the high-end CPUs, the most powerful Ryzen CPU costs around $500, whereas the Intel's counterpart, the most powerful one, cost around $1,200. I mean, that's a huge difference. And I've heard that Intel is actually cutting the prices of some of their CPUs already, because they are fully aware that they may actually lose the battle for the performance per price, right? So, I mean, this is the thing. If I am to pay $200 for a CPU that offers me XYZ frames per second, right, in the game, and then I have got Intel counterpart that offers me maybe 10 frames per second more for $300, which one would you go for? I mean, if you've got pretty powerful graphics card, and games mainly rely on graphics cards anyway, would you pay this extra $100, or you would go for Ryzen and maybe spend this extra $100 that you just saved for a more powerful GPU? So Intel is fully aware that AMD is able to compete with them right now. They will probably not take them over in terms of gaming benchmarks and stuff. Even after optimization, I'm sure they will not be able to beat Intel, but they may be roughly on par with what Intel is offering right now. And maybe, Intel obviously is working on new technologies as well, so you never know. But, until that happens, Ryzen CPU is actually very good and pretty powerful CPU. I'm talking about obviously the most powerful one, and it's very reasonable priced. And I didn't even mention the Ryzen CPUs that will be coming later on this year. They should come up around, I think, May, maybe June, second quarter of this year, generally speaking. And we're talking about 6-core and 4-cores CPUs. So CPUs that will actually be the most competitive CPUs on the market, because they really do have very competitive price and pretty good performance as well. So it's not going to be, I don't think that we'll see a situation as we've seen before, where you've got 4-core or 6-core AMD CPU that is being beaten buy 2-core 4 threads Intel CPUs, and I've seen that really a lot, really. So I don't think that's going to happen anymore. Ryzen seems to be very good CPU. I mean, it's actually good to see that that AMD has finally get their sort of acts together, and they actually come up with a good CPU. Something that will finally be able to compete with Intel, not necessarily beat them to death, but at least Intel have some competition, and which already actually caused Intel to cut the prices. So even if you don't plan to buy a Ryzen CPU, you may benefit of the AMDs being on the market, because Intel is cutting the prices. So you may actually get the CPU you are looking for from Intel for less price. So I think that's good news all around, and we should actually stick to this. And I'm sure that obviously Ryzen will get better with time, with more optimized games and stuff. There's probably going to be better drivers, maybe even better motherboards, I don't know, because everything is new motherboards, new motherboards, new socket, etc, etc. So everything is new and shiny. But I'm sure they will optimize it even further. So with new revisions that will probably come later on, I don't know, maybe next year or whatever, we will probably see even more performance out of these CPUs, and this is very, very good, because it's good for us as consumers. And that wraps up this video, really. So thank you very much for tuning in and obviously sharing all my videos with others. I really do appreciate that. Hopefully you did enjoy this video, and if you did, you know the drill. Let me know what you think about it, comment in the comment section below, hit the like button, subscribe, and you take care. Bye.